Good morning, Dave.
Morning,
Have
Dan.
your morning.
Actually,
How are you?
afternoon, Dan, I should say.
Oh, yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. It's your 1:30 now. You're probably
yeah.
past your coffees for the day, and
I am past my coffees. We obviously get up a little bit ahead of Australia, but
yeah,
yeah, we're through on there.
always trust Kiwis to be ahead of the game. Welcome,
Oh,
everyone.
sometimes, yeah, yeah. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining, guys. We'll just wait a minute or two. Have a bit of a pause, waiting for some people just to drop on in. Really looking forward to this one today, everyone. It's a my favorite subject, invoicing. Dave, what about you? I'm not sure if that's your favorite subject as well, but
Look,
invoicing, the
it's
fun part of the month.
yeah, exactly. And we're coming up. Oh no, the 20th of the day today. So today is the day when people pay you money. So that's today's usually a good day in New Zealand. I'm not sure how the terms are in Australia, but I know plenty of small businesses look forward in
Absolutely.
anticipation to the 20th. Yeah, invoices is incredibly important because that's the output of the great work you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite timely coming into the end of month as well. So obviously today we'll be going through invoicing as a subject. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name's Dan. I'm the founder of Set Up My Systems. I've spent the last 12 years implementing WorkflowMax and a range of other best of breed job and project management software. Really excited to go through this one with you today. And with me also is Dave. Dave, I'll let you do your own intro, mate. I'm
So,
not going to do it as well as you can.
thanks, mate. So kia ora, my name's Dave. I'm from Ripped Orange. So I run a company called Ripped Orange. We've been using WorkflowMax as a business for, well, yeah, probably close to 12 years as well. And we've been training and supporting people to put WorkflowMax together. And we're based in Christchurch, New Zealand.
It's so representation for the Oz Pacific nation or AU and NZ. So we will be touching today on some subtle differences between geographies, of course. For those joining us overseas in northern parts in the northern hemisphere, welcome as well. I'm sure many of you will be watching the recording. And just some general housekeeping for today as well. Today we will be recording the session. So please, if you do have to run off early, do not worry. The recording will be available directly on the WorkflowMax website. So just a reminder here that you can view these masterclasses by just clicking into the link and you'll see a plethora of masterclasses. This is the month of masterclasses, everyone. So it's a really exciting time. Dave and myself and a few of the other partners, we're putting our heads together with the support of Linnell, Dave, and the WorkflowMax team to try and share and impart some knowledge. So really encourage everyone to jump in. We're going to try and keep it as relatable as possible. Dave and I are in the weeds in businesses each and every day. So really, really looking forward to going through this one. And as mentioned, it will be recorded as well. Just as an additional note, apart from the website, just a reminder that you've got the green orange button on the side, your question mark of power, I call it, Dave. You've got the ability, obviously, to contact support, which will directly link to your tenant or your file, I should say, and submit a feature request. The team are always really keen to hear about feature requests. Obviously, we've got the link to the webinars in there as well. So a really in app and in browser feature just to be mindful of so you can get to a
And
lot of
that
stuff there.
that feature request is really good. It gives you a feel for what's coming, when the press a button and make a coffee features coming to WorkflowMax or other ones that you've asked for. Really gives you a feel for what's coming and how you can plan.
Dave, I wonder how much pressure we can put on the team today while they're listening to make their coffee feature. I like the sound
Yeah,
of that one,
exactly.
mate.
I think that'd be pretty good,
Uh,
eh? We'll get
particularly with some,
everybody. It's crowdsourced, so you can just come in and vote for it.
yeah, Linnell, expect Linnell's in the background and Dave, expect the make a coffee in the beta available by
Yeah.
end of week, please. And just a note on that as well, some of you will be excited in beta is the HubSpot integration. So reminder for that one, you can sign up a contact support to get early access to the job and staff schedule. I actually had a session on that yesterday and the HubSpot integration. So some pretty exciting stuff there. Dave, anything else I've missed for housekeeping?
No, I think that's all good. So yeah, it's recorded and we can work our way through from there. And we've got a bit of an agenda we're going to work through today, and this is going to be the Dan and Dave show. We'll take a question as we go. Um, and if you've got questions, again, pop them into the Q&A or chat, and one of the team from WorkflowMax will give us a nudge if we want to answer it straight away.
Yeah, beautiful. So please start asking Q&As right from the start, guys. We'll try and get to them as soon as possible. We'll allow some time, 45 minutes. today's session for Q&A at the background. We'll also have a link directly to Dave and I, so you can book a meeting with either of us. The limited spots available, so when we show that at the end, please make sure you jump in and book a session. But getting started around the fundamentals of invoicing, and again, this particular masterclass is really designed for anywhere from the beginner stages of users of WorkflowMax right up to the intermediate, and touching on some of the expert settings as well. Particularly in Q&A, feel free to ask some more advanced options. If we can answer on the fly, we will. Otherwise, please book a session. But the fundamentals is we're making assumption here that most people that are joining us today will be using Xero as their accounting platform. So if we're looking through that as a starting point, let's look at setting up that Xero integration. Now, look, we have had a session on this one before, so we won't go into the in-depth weeds of setting up Xero. But this is really important, particularly for the further points that we talk about in relation to where we're sending invoices, how invoices get pushed across to Xero, etc., and the mapping itself. So we get started. Again, this handy cog up the top right-hand corner. We can also access that by business and settings. Come in, select, and come straight to set up my integration. Now, I've already set this one up, but you'll notice there that when you go in to connect to your Xero file, you'll be prompted to log in and put in your details. Now, just make a note, you will go to a confirmation screen, which will essentially highlight which particular Xero file you're connecting to. So just take an extra moment there when you go to connect your Xero to make sure that you're correcting to the right Xero file. I know many of us joining the call today may be across more than one Xero file, particularly if you've got multiple entities, or maybe you're a bookkeeper or an accountant that's helping your client with WorkflowMax. So just a note there. And as always, you can double check the organization once you are connected, just to make sure you're connected to the right file. We've got the confirmation there, the demo file as well as connected. So going through, the options that we see here is exactly the same as what you see when you initially configure that integration. So touching on obviously our income account, our cost of sales account, tax as well, and tax on sales and tax on purchase. Just to be conscious there, I know these default codes are probably more in line with what we see in the P&L for the base file of Xero when it's provisioned in Australia. Dave, is there any subtle changes there that you typically see with the default P&Ls that come through?
No, it's normally the default P&L is the same. The taxes are different, have different terms, but the P&L is normally pretty similar.
Yep. So you'll notice there that these tax settings will integrate through. Obviously, this is an Australian demo file, so it's using the GST reference. So GST on income, GST for expenses, tracking categories, we can set that. Now, clients and suppliers, this is a particularly important settings to think about as we go through. Updating details in Xero. So when we're looking to update details between the two systems, never, only when uploading invoices and every time client or supplier details are updated. Typically, by default, I recommend clicking this middle one. And the reason is you typically don't want that sync happening both ways. It's an extra sanity check just in case one of your staff members are making changes, and when you go to invoice and go, actually, that's not the company name, I need to change it back, or whatever the case is. Obviously, user settings are really important to set controls around things like changing client names, supplier names, and WorkflowMax, so you're not accidentally updating there, but that's a really good one to do. Obviously, the ultimate controls have never, and then update from there. But when we're uploading invoices, that's a really, really common one to pick. Now, this one in particular is quite often one that I leave off.
This one's tricky.
Yeah, and the reason is depending, and a lot of the environments we walk through today and examples, everyone is really based on your business requirements and business context. But this one for me is typically one that I leave off to start. And the reason is when you are provisioning a project against a client, there might be more than one contact that client has. So depending on the project you're doing, it'll be a different client contact representative. Every time you raise an invoice, we don't want that primary contact for the project of the client updating the Xero primary billing contact necessarily. So many of us, for our clients, will have a default billing contact in Xero. So by default, I typically suggest to leave that off. Obviously, if you're dealing with smaller businesses, maybe you want to be able to update the contact. You can tick that on if required. Again, we're talking about getting started with the Xero integration and putting in some controls in place. So typically, we start by leaving the invoice example as a draft. The invoice number sequence, for instance, would be selected as Xero typically. You can provision your own invoicing number sequence to be driven from WorkflowMax. Again, this is really much workflow dependent. The benefit of Xero is if you've been using Xero for a period of time, it'll literally sync and reference the Xero invoice
I think
number.
we've seen a couple of interesting things on that one. So now and then, Xero might have a hiccup and go down, and it won't pick up the latest number from Xero, because how that setting works is it talks to Xero and says, hey, give me a number, and then it comes back in, and that's why you'll see it change quite quickly. So there's a couple of learnings there. Having it on Xero is good. If you notice that your Xero has gone down, do come into your WorkflowMax and just make sure that it's connected and reconnected. It probably will, but just like a warning light on a car, it's coming in and checking, because you don't want to find that out once you've done your whole invoice run.
That's actually a really good point, Dave, and we'll show shortly. There's actually an error log setting in the invoice settings where you
Good.
can sanity check as well. So that's I'm really glad you mentioned that, mate. Now, the invoice description is an interesting one. Again, there is some subtle adjustments you'll make here depending on whether you're sending the invoice from Xero or WorkflowMax. There is the option to do either or, as in sending that invoice to the client directly from WorkflowMax or Xero. There's obviously a sync that will still happen in the background if you are electing to send from WorkflowMax, but Dave's going to go through, we'll go through some examples of that later on. By default, though, I do like to pull through essentially all these job enabled merge fields. And this gives us the ability, particularly if we're just getting started with the integration, to sanity check what is pushed across. And then once we've done an invoice, adjust what we need to in Xero, come back and update the relevant settings. So for instance, when I put through this job summary, I might elect to come back and go, I don't need the job description in there. The client name, I don't need to reference again, or the contact name. So just as a bit of a handy hint to get started, this will come up effectively as a first line on that invoice when it's pushed across to Xero. Some extra settings to include here. So include invoice description as a line in the Xero invoice. That will literally create a line across the other lines that appears in Xero when we push that invoice across. And some other options in there in terms of show task description, show task with $0 value, show cost notes, show cost with $0 value. Again, very workflow dependent, guys. So we'll touch on some different options for that later on. Coming down, as a starting point, obviously we've got the two different summary examples for the calculated pricing method. We're going to touch on the calculated versus fixed pricing method in just a moment. So bear with us on that one. There is a bit of an example of how that does push across. Invoice payments, this is when we're applying a invoice payment in Xero, whether that reconciliation note comes through. And similar to invoicing, I've elected to leave this as a draft as a starting point for two reasons. We're assuming here that we want to test, make sure that everything's coming across. So when we put a bill, for instance, against the purchase orders, that's coming across with the relevant information. We're going to do some testing and have all this information pre-populate and push through. So again, when we push that bill across, the job number will come across on that bill, the job name, the purchase order number, the purchase order description. We can come in and back and update this after we've done a test run and go from there. Automatically import invoices from Xero. This is a premium feature. This is one personally I love, Dave. Being able to raise, particularly for our reoccurring jobs. So if we do retainers in our business or managed services contracts, being able to raise a reoccurring invoice, referencing the job number in the reference field, will push that back. So we'll show you an example of that shortly. So we want to automatically import invoices from Xero if that's related to our business and our business requirements. Quite a few of the businesses joining us here today will never raise an invoice in Xero. They'll just raise it with WorkflowMax. That's fine, but we do have an option of doing that there. Essentially, what I've elected to do as a starting point is for all invoices, excluding invoices with no reference. So that will just allocate that invoice to a client if it hasn't picked up a job number referenced. This one's particularly important. So when you do raise an invoice in Xero to then push back to WorkflowMax, it will only journal and push through one line. So you can have 10 lines there that are summarized. What gets pushed back to WorkflowMax is essentially just aligned with whatever that invoice summary is. So just keep that in mind, particularly if you are sending a lot of invoices from Xero and just getting it Xero to send that journal back to WorkflowMax. You're not getting the full detail. Your source of truth will directly be still in Xero for that particular invoice. So that's really the starting points of our Xero settings. We'll refer back to some of these when we talk about some invoice examples. I think the next question is quite pertinent to you there.
So we get asked this a lot. Should I send the invoice from WorkflowMax or Xero first? And so you got to think about it. Am I sending it from Xero, so it comes out of Xero to the customer, or am I sending it from WorkflowMax? Both have an invitation to pay. The difference really is pros and cons, but the difference with sending it from WorkflowMax is you can sometimes add a bit more detail. So if you want to include a lot of stuff from some of the other tables, going via WorkflowMax is useful. You can still send the dollars through to Xero. We're just talking what does the customer receive. If you can also, if you invoice from WorkflowMax and send it from WorkflowMax, you can include what was quoted as well. So you can provide some more details there. So yeah, there's pros and cons in both, and you can do a mix of either in that space. Okay, the next thing that we were going to chat about was integration settings, or do you want me to go through those graphics?
Yeah, integration settings, we can certainly touch on. Going through the invoicing basics, we can come back to some of those graphics. So Xero integrations, particularly important. So as we touched on there, guys, our default settings at any given point of time, we can come back to. Just probably a particular note, particularly with our integration settings, is that when we do look to raise a invoice directly from Xero and push that back to WorkflowMax, I'll just show exactly where we're sending that through. We are coming to raise an invoice, and again, that raising an invoice in this particular file, we want to pick a job that we've been working on. A good one might be our what's a good one? Let's find this one. Thank you, Apparatus Quo, as well, for providing this one as well. We'll come into what's a good one? There we go.
You had me KFC on that list.
Yeah, I know. KFC is always KFC needs a little bit of branding and branding support. So we'll come back into bank electronics. Just a little bit of a note here as well, everyone. So if it is a new client that you don't have in Xero, recommendation here is to actually push that and create that contact directly in Xero first, just so that sync back from Xero to WorkflowMax works. That's just a little one that I typically find. So for instance, if I hadn't raised an invoice to banks before and it wasn't in Xero, add as a contact into Xero, copying the exact naming structure so that comes through okay. So we might just pick on this one and we'll give it a moment to come through. We'll go invoice. So again, what's the full name? Banks. So we'll put in banks. Electronics, we'll put in the reference number. So again, just a really quick one with this reference number. See how I've copied them, pasted that in. I've checked there's no gaps at the end. I've come to the front, make sure there's no gaps there. Whatever I put in for the invoice to send to the customer is fine. Again, the invoice reference that we put into the settings will be what comes through. So 25, that, put in any of our other particulars in terms of region, tax rate, etc. And we're approving that. Oh, we've got to put in a due date. We'll do a +1 due date, 21st.
Cool, that's smart to know that. There you go.
Yeah, +1, +7, guys, and the due date works really well,
Excellent.
apart from all of the other defaults. And then from there, we will be sending across. So I think the API will sync once or twice a minute. So that will take a few minutes to come in. But particularly just in and around the settings, and just something to be conscious of that we'll go through in more detail is how the account codes work and what gets journaled across the P&L. So we'll touch on that in a few moments, and we'll come back to that job shortly to have a bit of a look. Invoicing basics.
Yeah, cool. That setting of coming back is useful. Really good if you're doing repeating invoices, because the repeating feature, is nice and Xero. But let's cover off some invoicing basics around this. So got a couple of images here. So first of all, so estimated billings, what is that? That means time that you have done and recorded on your timesheet at the cost that you've planned to bill it out plus cost. So as you add those two together, your WIP builds up. Yeah. If you've got a cost that doesn't cost anything, then it doesn't impact your estimated billings. Now, what have we got as the next image there? So pricing mode. Oh, actually, sorry, just go to invoicing and WIP. And invoicing terms, we'll go to that one first, sorry. So invoicing terms, when you actually go to invoice, you ask, how do you want to invoice? And so you've got 3 buttons to press. Actual time and cost. So when you do that, it will invoice the WIP. So you've got to watch your time then. If you're doing it at the end of the month, it will do at whatever time you tell it to do. Quote or estimated. So if there is a quote, it will invoice as per the quote. And a progress one, it just creates actually a new cost item as a deposit. So it's cash only. Now let's come to that invoice and WIP image, because there's implications for all of these. So when you do an actual time and cost, estimated billings goes down. When you do a quoted or estimated quoted invoice, and quoted and estimated are the same thing. Yes, they mean different things, but from WorkflowMax's point of view, it's the same word. It doesn't change the estimated billings. The estimated billings is still there, and when you do a final invoice, it balances the true, it writes the WIP off. So if you think you've done a job and you've had a job approved, quoted, and you send an invoice as per quote, you will be in negative WIP, which is good. It means you've got the cash, or you've invoiced, but you've done no work. As you start to do work, the two will match out. And if you're lucky enough that you do work that is of the estimated billings of that work is less than the what the quote was, then that's good. You've made a bigger profit than you thought, and you can head off to wherever you want to do with that. So those are the two. And then the third one is a progress amount, which just generates a cost in $1. Now, let's come into the pricing mode one. So this is important because when you generate an invoice, you'll see there's an option that says pricing mode fixed or calculated. And just looking, and it's new in your Xero integration as well, actually, that feature around calculated is worth having a look at because there's some new settings there around rounding, etc. So if I charge at $100 an hour and I do 1 hour, that's fine. If it's a calculated pricing mode, I will invoice for $100. But maybe there's an extra fee that I want to put on top of it. So I want to charge $150 for my hours worth of work. I would then flip it to fixed. And then at that stage, I can actually come in and fill in whatever figure I want. So you're moving towards value pricing in that space. So actual and cost, we can work through from there. Now, if we could come back to that image, because there's one more thing to think about around that. Cool, thank you. So the other option, so that's how you can round up or round down when you generate an invoice, when you start the process as actuals. The other thing that people might like to do is do progress invoices as per a contract. So you've put up a quote for 10K and you want to, that's been approved, and you want to draw down from that. So when you generate the invoice, you do as per quote. It'll say, hey, do you want to bill 10K? You go, no, I can only bill, say, 3K at this stage. Flick it to fixed and put in 3K. You can send the invoice off. That's great. When you come back the next month to invoice that and you go, great, I want to invoice as per fixed, you come in, what will the figure be? So you've 10K quote and you've invoiced 3K. What are you expecting the figure to show? Dan?
10 points for guessing 7. Maths wasn't my strong point.
Perfect. So 7. So you can start to draw down on it. Now, where that's useful is A, it allows you to keep track of it. B, it allows you to, and remember we talked in the previous point about invoicing from WorkflowMax or Xero. It allows you to generate an invoice out of WorkflowMax in the custom templates. I know Mark did a session about this earlier this week or sometime. There's a template in there that says what was quoted, how much have you billed to date, and what's this for? So you can get those 3 figures and put it on a Word document. Those 3 figures you can't push through to Xero. So that's the one scenario where it makes sense to invoice from WorkflowMax, or one of the scenarios. So pricing mode's really important. It allows you to come in and have a look, and then do also look at the setting in Xero as well.
Great, Dave. Just a really good question came through. I'm not sure if you want to answer or I can, but there was a question from a lady called Anonymous. How does this relate to deposits? I find it confusing at times. It's a very good question, whoever asked that in the group.
It depends on how you treat a deposit, because a deposit sits as a negative cost against it and it washes it up at the end. So if your terms are, I invoice 10K and at the start of that work, I want to invoice 3K, then that's fine. But remember, that impacts your WIP. So it comes down to whether it's a deposit or whether it's whether you're just drawing down from a quote.
Yeah, so really, really good point there. And I guess part of what we're talking about here when we talk about WIP, everyone, if you aren't really much across WIP or you don't use WIP for reporting, performance reporting for your business, I really encourage you to do so. And there's a few reasons why. WorkflowMax has this beautiful balance for performance of measuring both GP performance. So what did it actually cost us and what did it invoice? Or alternatively, performance reporting in the form of WIP. So what is the accumulation of billable time costs? To the question, minus any deposits gives us a remaining WIP. And potentially estimated billings. Estimated billings here can be representative of the original quoted price as well. But if you're just paying attention to that balancing WIP, then that's a really good sort of breakdown of that time costs minus deposits equals your WIP.
Yeah,
Give you
and
that.
the
So
reason why
hopefully that
those are
helps.
the negatives there is you've raised a big deposit, which is fine. And that's why we've got a negative WIP and an estimated billings of negative. Now, I'm no accountant and don't want to progress anything, but end of the financial year here in New Zealand next week, and accountants want to know, hey, what's your WIP balance as of this date? So WorkflowMax can give that to you. If you start getting into wanting to journal from one month to another and really managing your WIP, that WorkflowMax can give you the pictures, but Xero, you need to do the work in there. And it's a good time to have a conversation with your accountant or somebody who is more specialized in that area.
Yeah, so a little bit there to balance in terms of looking at that, how the different invoicing types impacts WIP. Typically, what I find as well is that quite often this gets confusing if we don't do one or two simple things. The first one is typically when you go to raise your invoices, try not to change your invoicing type. That can sometimes really confuse what's happening with that WIP journal, where that's
Yep.
sitting. And so, for instance, and we had a customer at the beginning of the week that had this workflow that they will invoice based off a quoted value. So they'll invoice, say, up to $10,000, but they'll actually raise invoices based on actuals. When they get to that final invoice, they'll do a review of what's been invoiced to date and what's remaining, and then they'll just implant essentially what that remaining value is. But the key point there is that they will always invoice based on actuals, even though technically they're invoicing against the quoted value because of the way that their customer wants to do the invoicing claims as they go. So a few different options there for everyone.
I
Dave,
think the
that's some really good
important
points.
thing there is document your process, because you invoice once a month. And I don't know about you, but learning a skill is all about repetition, and trying to repeat the same process every month gets tricky. You'll forget, or somebody else is doing it. So invoice, document the steps, because then you can pull it up when you do your invoicing run every month, especially when you get into just niggly things of you want to do this setting on this type of client.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Some really good points there, Dave. Is there anything else, particularly just
I
in
think we're
terms of the
all,
graphics we want to touch on?
no, we're all good.
Beautiful. No, that's absolutely basic. So gone through Xero integration settings, going through some of the invoicing basics. Now we're up to really account codes. Great. So I guess everyone, just as a bit of a reminder, the way that we can integrate to Xero directly from WorkflowMax is fundamentally at 3 different levels. So if you think about your account codes and your P&L, you'll have a direct relationship between what you put on an invoice in WorkflowMax and how you want it to go through correctly to your P&L. There's also tracking category mapping, which is available, as well as the timesheet integration, which we'll touch on in a moment. But specifically for the account code side, when we're raising invoices from WorkflowMax and sending those through to Xero, let's have a quick look at our 3 different fundamental options for what we can trigger there. So by default, your top tier level of integration is defined by what we put in our Xero settings. So let's have a quick look and see what they are. These are, again, we can change these at any time, defaulting to 200 sales and cost of sales, which is whenever we put a bill in to WorkflowMax against a purchase order, that is defining the default cost of sale account code or expense code that gets sent through to. So many of us will start there and then we'll go a level down. And that level down within WorkflowMax is actually defined by our job categories. So again, this is really workflow dependent. So quite often, say if you're an engineer, you're an architect, there might be a particular sales revenue code and a cost of sales code that's attributed to your different types of, say, work that you do, whether it's industry, whether it's based on type of work. And what WorkflowMax enables you to do is really define what that mapping relationship is and define it by category if that suits us. So again, we can come in, track by category, This is just a sample to our tracking categories in the Xero dummy file, which is region. You can define east side, north side. But again, this could be industry, type of work, whatever the case is. And our explicit income account and cost of sale account. So that's kind of that next level down, the second tier. And many businesses use that. And again, it's really having a look and having a chat to your accountant about how your P&L is structured and your tracking categories to get the most out of your financial reporting. The next level down is where things get really exciting. Dave, I'm sure you would agree, which is in that explicit line item relationship. So every time we raise a sales invoice, what against tasks and costs, where are we mapping those individual line items to? And there's a few different ways to do it. So if we're referring back to our task list, we can come in and look at our accounting interface. Now, we've got 200 sales allocated to many of these. Now, maybe we want to adjust these in bulk, and this feature here is really, really handy. So maybe we want to allocate business in client, allocate these to other revenue. Define category, define option. We don't have a second tracking category in this particular dummy account, but if we did, we could put that in there. And we can model and map. So every time I raise an invoice against this particular line item, say business development, business website of that setting on the invoice, the value of 200 will go to 200 sales for business development. The value against business website will go to 260 as well. So that's specifically for when we're invoicing off line items.
And that will trump any other settings that are above it, I'm assuming.
Absolutely.
Yep. So we normally explain it as like an onion. You go through the layers as you go, right down to the bottom one, but the bottom one will trump. So if you're troubleshooting it, you've got to understand how many layers are set around what the income code is from there.
An onion, mate. I love that. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that next time. Do love a bit of an onion reference. Just like an onion.
Document it again, because when you go, oh, I need to add a new code for this, make sure you document or you understand what you're trying to achieve there.
And so, Dave, if we were troubleshooting this one, particularly if we found that certain invoices were going to the wrong code, I guess the first place would go is the task and cost list like we're doing now. Check the allocation. And then from there would go to the job categories that job was aligned to, that the invoice was a bit wrong. And then check that and the default settings there. And then conversely, obviously, moving up to the onion to our default settings. So again, just in terms of these handy filters there, there's the allocated and unallocated. So if you're a finance business owner, you can come in and actually see what's been allocated, but then toggle between what's non-allocated. So particularly if you're adding costs quite repeatedly as you go, this is something that as an end of week, end of month check and balance, you might want to do just before you invoice, just to make sure that any new and additional cost codes go into the correct spot.
And if you're doing the invoicing out of Xero as well, and they all arrive in Xero and you go, crap, I need to load a category for each of these, that's going to be your motivation to fix it for the next month, to come in and tidy it up. So you look at the repetition that you end up doing in Xero and go, that's annoying, I'm going to come back.
Absolutely. So it's a really good flag. If you find that you're updating things every time you do an invoice, it's always a good opportunity there to think about what we can change at the front end to streamline that as we go. So controlling what syncs, Dave, this is an interesting one.
Yeah, so how the invoice looks after they've been exported to Xero. So you've got a couple of controls. Can I get you to bring up the integration screen? There's a couple of things in there. So if we scroll to the bottom of the Xero integration screen, so you can control in here what appears on the invoice itself. So that's including the purchase orders, or the same with an invoice as well, same settings to bring stuff through. So that is useful. To control the logos and other things that appear on the invoice, that's in Xero, in the Xero template. So you've got task description, Xero value, cost notes. If you scroll down on there, cost notes. And there is, however, one little setting. Where is that timesheet one that drops the timesheets into the task?
Timesheets into the task.
I think that's on the template itself. It's in the print template. No.
Yeah.
But that setting, we'll drop it into the Q&A of where it is. What that does is we'll summarize a little bit of the timesheet entry into the task when people put it in. So it will bring that through to Xero. It's not going to give you everything, but it will bring through some stuff around there.
Actually,
So
on that,
that's
Dave,
in,
so where
yeah,
we're talking about there is actually directly in the
here.
and this is something really important to note, particularly when you're making a decision as to whether you're raising your invoices and
Mm.
sending them to the customer versus raising your invoices in WorkflowMax, but sending it to the customer from Xero. Obviously from Xero, whatever's pushed across, you'll be using your Xero invoice templates. And the reason why a lot of customers go, well, hang on, I'm actually going to send the invoice from WorkflowMax is because you get greater configurability as to what you can show. And a really good place to start, including things like the timesheet. Timesheet notes is obviously in our custom print templates. So particularly for invoicing, and you'll notice that the quote sample templates will mirror quite a few of the different show and tell options, as I call them, between quotes and invoicing. But something that, just touching on that point before, Dave, if we're invoicing off phases or we're invoicing directly with our timesheet summaries, we've got essentially some options here that we can click through as a sample and then update. And these samples are really handy because they imprint those merge field templates so you can do things like, great, I need to show phases, I need to show the detail, the tasks and costs, and I need to show timesheets, for instance, and you've got that all there.
Do you use caution if you're going to show all your timesheets and the time of those timesheets and your value-based billing? So what you don't want is an invoice showing 3 hours and then a bill for 5 because you know you did some other stuff, but you didn't bother with putting the timesheet in, because then you've got to explain a few things on the invoice. So
Yeah, absolutely.
trap for young players there.
Yeah, so just as a reminder, everyone, these sample invoice templates is a really good place to start, but that's where you can really define, obviously, the specifics, including the logos, your terms of business, and everything else. Our standard invoice, so when we go to raise a standard invoice, we can toggle on the default settings whether we want to include a timesheet there or not as well. So that's a really good starting point.
Cool.
Dave, anything else particularly?
No, it's there'll be different options for different customers. You got to think about what you want to deliver to the customer on how the invoice looks, and then you work through from there, and it will vary.
Now, look, really, really interesting one in terms of this next point. So there's actually been a subtle tweak recently in some of the new information we can pull from Xero into WorkflowMax. So probably the starting point would be, let's have a look at the integration quickly. And just being conscious of time, Dave, I won't talk too long about this one. Because we do want to allow as much time for Q&A at the end as possible. Importing invoices as that first step. So obviously that's particularly important, particularly if we want to bring in historical invoices, if we're new to connection and want to attribute that to the clients. Just be cautious of that is a premium feature for one. So check out Premium. Premium is just one that everyone should sign up for, I think. That's not a selfish plug for WorkflowMax, everyone. WorkflowMax aren't twisting my arm behind me to say that, but Premium is really good for
and
capacity.
premiums. I get this asked a bit. I think it's $50, isn't it, per month?
Yeah, that and the lead module, $15.
Yeah, but
Okay.
that's not per person. That's across the whole tenant. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So obviously the premium settings, but we've got the ability to import invoices, payments, and now import contacts. So that's a relatively new one. So those are really, really important. Just a reminder as well, one of the things you do want to sync straight away, so whenever you make an update, is your tax types as well. So sync options is updating any of the tax type settings and everything and pulling through. So that's some of the fundamentals that we can pull across, but ultimately we can also pull across the invoice. So as mentioned before, whenever we want to raise an invoice and push that through directly, including the payment that eventually gets made against that invoice that's raised from Xero and gets pushed through. So for instance, I might want to set up reoccurring invoices that will have the reoccurring invoice template using the reference of that same job number. We can see here that there's one or two I've done before for that bank electrics. And again, if we look at the invoicing structure, whatever we want to put in the invoice is fine. Remember that we are sending this invoice directly to the customer from Xero. That integration, when we are raising invoices in Xero, we're really designing that workflow to be sending that invoice from Xero directly to the customer. We're not syncing it back to WorkflowMax and sending it from WorkflowMax. That's not really best practice. There is one customer I know that does that, but again, very, very rare. And we're referencing that reference number just at the top. So when we come back to this particular job and we approve that invoice, only at the approved status will that come back. We can check that that's all there. So we've got a few different things. We've got payments, we've got invoices that pull across, and now contacts, which is really cool. That's actually got quite quite an exciting one. We can see here that we've got a few invoices that have come across, and again, coming down to what's on that Xero invoice test. So again, that default that we set up in our Xero integration settings, we put in any invoices imported from Xero will have X in the line item, and that's it. So that's pulled across successfully to that particular job, the one we did earlier.
And that'll show up in your job profitability, which is great. Or your JFS.
It certainly will. Certainly will. Anything else I've missed on that one, Dave?
No, I think that is good. Useful for the specific cases you've got, if you've got that use case.
Retainers, managed services. There's quite a few there. There's some jammy stuff. Timesheets.
I'm looking forward to this. This is good for Australian accounts. Is it New Zealand as well?
Not yet. Not yet. So I'm being mean. I'm trying to make you talk about something that I'm playing hard to get, Dave. Sorry, mate. Shouldn't be saying this. I'm sure New Zealand won't be too far away, though.
We're about 500 Ks, mate. But anyway, if not a bit more.
Fundamentally, though, the settings will be relatively the same. So going through. I can touch on this one if you like, mate.
Yeah, that would. Well, I said it's Australian invoice and timesheet, so I'll get you to talk to that. But that's cool. So you need Xero payroll, don't you?
You do.
Yeah.
So there are a few preliminary settings that you need to have done first. This is a bit of a measure on this. So if you're wanting to fundamentally send your timesheets across to payroll, Xero payroll for associating to a pay template, paying your staff from the hours that they work, you'll need to do one or two things first. The first thing is you'll need to have payroll set up in Xero. You'll need to have your employee set up in Xero and their pay templates, etc., all set up, ready to go, as well as creating pay runs. So you'll need to create your pay runs in Xero to make sure that that can sync across. Because if we look at the integration, the configuration, so when we go into Xero integration, we've got that tab that will appear here for export timesheets. And again, this is why it's really key to have, again, in terms of layering that onion, that top layer of the onion as we go down is very much the Xero payroll, employee set up, correct pay template applied to those employees, and then pay run created. Once we've created that pay run, we can select that relevant pay run that's there. And mapping staff is quite simple. On the left-hand side, we've got the mapping that lists directly from the staff in WorkflowMax, and we can tie that directly to the staff member that's there. So we've got James LeBron, Sally, and Oliver as Dan. So obviously the name's a little bit different because I'm integrating to a demo Xero file, but typically you'd be looking for a like-to-like in names. Go through and hit export. Now there is a soft limitation, guys. So this is limited to 25 employees per pay run. So if you get to your 25 and then you've got, say, 50, 60, 70 staff, just go in and repeat this process. You do the first 25, leave everyone as blank, everyone else after 25. So from 26, select a Xero employee, hit export. Then you'd come back into this, and then starting from the 26 employee, you'd then start selecting them and go down. So if you do have more than 25, just do 25 at a time, and that will limit any chances of a syncing error coming through.
So obviously that will send through all the timesheet records that James LeBron, that's it, has put in.
So a bit of a basketball reference for those playing at home.
If James probably struggles a bit to do his timesheet, and so if he only records billable time, he's only going to get paid for the time he actually worked. And if James gets paid for training as well, which I'm sure he does, and he forgot to put that in, it's not going to sync through. So there's some process there that you need to think about within WorkflowMax before you turn this on. Otherwise, James is going to come looking for you because you haven't paid him enough.
Absolutely. And it's really designed to be suited to those customers where their workflow really supports and requirements really support having their staff recording all their time in. So both on-job, off-job time, billable and non-billable time. So that's a great point, Dave. And I guess more advanced invoicing options. Dave, anything that you feel that we've missed as a base start? Thank you, Linnell, and other David in the background as well. WorkflowMax team has been really busy on the Q&A answering all those for us. But Dave, anything that you feel that we've missed as a base summary?
No, I think there's a lot in there. Some of the things that I see with customers is they give too much detail in their invoice, which makes it just really hard for them, etc. Their customer may love it, but it makes a lot of effort for them to do that. So you've really got to think, what is the purpose of the invoice? Is it just hey, we would like you to pay X, or is it a story around the job and the work? And sometimes putting the two on the same document is not the best idea, because it just adds yourself some more time. So thinking about it holistically on what's the purpose of the invoice versus what's the purpose of an end of month report around my activity, and maybe they're different, and splitting the two may make life easier, because as you've seen here, there's a lot of options, and the more layers you put on it, the more complicated it is. So having a refresh look at it can be good as well.
And I think definitely, Dave, to that point as well, it's around really thinking about some of the critical workflow decisions. So are we sending the invoice from WorkflowMax versus are we sending it from Xero? And keeping in mind that, some of that would be driven by the business requirement to show detail. What detail do you need to share? But also your financial controls. A lot of businesses do elect to invoice directly to the customer from Xero, because it means that their project managers, their business managers, their seniors, they can be running jobs end to end. They can be project leads. They can raise the invoice and approve the invoice, but their workflow is to not send the customer. It's just when they approve the invoice in WorkflowMax, it's going to Xero, and that enables finance to have that control of the final check and balance. Refer back, obviously, when we push WorkflowMax invoices to Xero, we can click a button. There's that little link there in Xero that we can go back to WorkflowMax and vice versa. In fact, I'll show you where that is quickly, so we can have a bit of a gander. But in our invoice log, because we didn't actually show this, mate, this is one of the ones. We've got our little linky link, which I don't have any of those there, but there's normally a little link that comes through. Let's go. There we go. So
Which
error
is really
comment.
good.
Yeah. So we're going to highlight over there. See what's synced. Go to the invoice. Hey, presto.
Which is great.
Yeah. And you'll notice that comes back and forth as well. So invoicing customer. So this, you'll be able to directly use this as your source of truth for finding invoices, irrespective of whether you raise invoices in Xero or WorkflowMax. So it's really cool there. Mate, anything else you missed? I feel like we could probably geek out and talk about different workflows in different industries. Does anyone just, I've got an extra few minutes. I know we're going over time, so I'll just put up on the screen for anyone that wants to book in some time before we workshop anything else. Feel free, connect with both Dave and or I. We're both here, part of the support community. But I guess, Dave, was there anything else,
I
mate,
think
from your
one other
side?
one would be, I invoice in Peruvian pesos. So how would you deal with that? How do you deal with that?
Well, multi-currencies is an exciting one, because that's actually, the guys are working on that. So there will be some subtle changes to this once that's released. Don't quote me, anyone, on exactly when the release date. It is on the pipeline, though. It is in conversation. So watch this space. But a very interesting one. Are we invoicing in multi-currency? So everyone, the starting point is the layer of the onion. So WorkflowMax is a one-for-one relationship between currency. So if we're in AU primarily, and every so often we receive a bill, for instance, in Peruvian, so what was the Peruvian? Call it
I think they're
USD.
pesos, I think. Yeah.
Pesos.
No, they're
Or
sols, sorry. Sols, I should say. I got that wrong. There you go.
Pesos. Sounds Spanish, or from the Philippines, peso.
Yeah.
But when we're invoicing customers, so again, by default, we've got a one-to-one relationship with currency at the moment. So not forever, but for the moment, we're invoicing in the single currency. So what you do as a starting point, and quite often, again, depends on the volume, but if your primary currency is AUD and once at a blue moon, you'll invoice in the alternate currency or you'll receipt the bill, you've got the option of using custom fields and other fields to reference what is essentially the dollar value that you're showing in that alternate currency. But then in our actual unit cost, reference the AUD quantity or our default currency, whatever it is. If you're New Zealand dollars, obviously it was the UK, pound, etc., and go from there.
And really, WorkflowMax is just a number. So how we do it, if we invoice into Australia, we just generate the same numbers in WorkflowMax, push it through, and then switch the currency with a multi-currency Xero to AUD. Yes, it won't match up 100% when it comes through, but it allows you to work in multiple currencies that way, mostly around time. But then, when we see multi-currency in WorkflowMax, that will be nice. But at the moment, WorkflowMax is just invoicing a number, may it be Australian, American, Peruvian, or pounds, whatever you wish.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely if you're invoicing a lot from different currencies or invoicing customers in different currencies, pushing that through and changing the actual currency to send to the client directly from Xero is a really easy and great way to do it. Again, volume is a big piece there, but watch that
Mhm.
space for multi-currency, Dave. It's exciting. Any other cherries that you have, mate? I think we've touched on quite a few
No,
things.
I think we are good. Thank you.
An absolute pleasure, Dave. Mate,
Likewise, Dan.
it's lunchtime for you, mate. It's or late lunch for you, I
Late
guess.
lunch.
Another coffee for me, for being in the morning. For
Perfect.
wherever you're joining us, thank you so much. Again, please don't be shy. Connect with Dave and I directly through the link. You've got our emails there. I think timing's a little bit limited for both of us over the next week, but there is some availability following that. Obviously, a massive thanks to the WorkflowMax team in the background for really
Yeah,
supporting on the
perfect.
Q&A. You actually nailed it. You haven't left us much there. But yeah, would love to, particularly with anyone that has some very specific workflow strategies and workflow problems, Dave and I and this glorious partner community and the support team is there, Linnell and David in the background. So thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Dave, for joining in.
Perfect. Thanks all. Mā te wā.
See you later. Bye.
Cheers.